the voice of Africa. As much as I believe that most of the sessions today were very important, I believe this session is particularly important given the fact that most of the developing countries, especially Africa, are suffering very hard from the current recession and the drawbacks and the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. Our moderator for today is Mr. Abdullah Ibieri from the Sovereign Fund. He is the Chief Investment Officer. I give it over to you. One final comment to the panelists. Please do not hold your mic like that because it gets cut. The wireless network gets cut. I would only advise you, encourage you to hold it like that so it doesn't cut. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. Today is the Finance Day, and this is very appropriate to be the closing session of the Finance Day. We are very pleased to welcome Dr. Hala Saeed, Her Excellency, to give the opening remarks for this session. Her Excellency is the Minister of Planning and Economic Development, but for us, a more important role for her is we're very honored to have her as the Chairperson of the Sovereign Fund of Egypt. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Hala Saeed to the podium.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me start by welcoming all our guests here at the Green City of Peace in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I wish you all a very fruitful COP27. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to participate in this closing session, which focuses on mobilizing capital through investments and alternative financing to unlock green investment opportunities in Africa and help African countries execute their green agendas. Africa enjoys a fast-growing young population and possesses an abundance of natural resources in addition to a unique geographical location and a huge, immense market. Nevertheless, the continent missed on the wealth the global economic development brought over the last century, and it contributed the least to challenges, yet it yielded most notably climate change. And while Africa's historical contribution to the changing climate is negligible, it stands out as the most vulnerable region to its effects. Mobilizing resources to advance Africa's climate agenda while pursuing development efforts needs to be perceived in the wider context of the current global economic situation, characterized by fundamental instability and coupled also with high interest rates. This results in an increasing cost of capital and high financial barriers for developing countries to scale up their green projects. Accordingly, funding support from development financial institutions, the DFIs, and technical assistance for projects de-risking is a fundamental catalyst to accelerate the green transition and support African countries in achieving their sustainable development goals. Additionally, the private sector is a key partner in the green transition. And let me emphasize that enabling regulatory environment and policy framework are key to crowding in private investors and aid Africa's transition to a green economy. For example, Egypt strengthened the landscape for effective private sector participation through competitive tendering of green projects to scale up investments and position Egypt as a regional green energy hub. The government also introduced several incentives for green projects, including land allocation at discounted prices, feed-in tariffs for electricity generated from renewable energy, reduced VAT on imported equipment, and tax deductions for green projects, and there are yet more to come through the recommendation and suggestions from the private sector. Furthermore, public-private partnerships are an effective tool for developing countries to attract foreign direct investment and unlock green investments by encouraging the private sector to participate in financing and operating green projects. Sovereign wealth funds play a critical role in harnessing the scale of the public sector and de-risking capacity on one hand, and the private sector's innovative and technical capabilities on the other hand. This is necessary to reconcile financial shortfalls and enhance investments in green activities, which can be perceived as risky by private investors, or at least unattractive. Indeed, sovereign funds are gaining significant momentum in Africa, especially with the developmental mandate and developmental agenda that most of the sovereign wealth funds have now. Hence, collaboration within and between countries carry the potential to capitalize on the continent's massive potential. The Sovereign Fund of Egypt, which I proudly chair, has been established to act as a catalyst in the early stages, availing new asset classes to the private sector while ensuring that such offering is properly structured to ensure attractiveness and bankability of all our investment offering. The Sovereign Fund is actively involved in renewable energy projects and contributing to Egypt's energy transition over its different phases. We have many examples to share, and I'm sure my colleagues at the Sovereign Fund will elaborate on this, specifically in green hydrogen, in water desalination, and wind power station. We believe that private-public partnerships are needed to achieve green economic growth, especially in our continent, Africa. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, unlocking funding is critical to pave the way forward to African countries in achieving their sustainability goals and combating climate change. DFIs are also key partners in this green transition. Technical assistance and capacity building is key and is to support Africa's green infrastructure. Alternative and innovative finance is also very important to help the private sector raise the capital through equity instruments and not through debt, and diversify their funding. Central banks also play a role in incentivizing sustainable finance and strengthening the role of the banking sector in funding green projects. Finally, I wish you all a very fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your kind words. Above all, your actions that speak longer than words. You lead an organization that is today in charge of taking the uncharted territory of venturing into green investments in Egypt and in Africa. Thank you. So, I was in an earlier session and it came to mind that it takes a village to raise a child. Now, with green investment projects, it takes everyone involved to make it happen. It doesn't only take debt investors, it doesn't only take DFIs, it doesn't only take sovereign funds, it doesn't only take private investors, it doesn't take only rating agencies, capital markets, authorities, governments, and so on and so forth. It takes everyone. We've spent a lot of time in COP discussing ideas. This is COP27, the first for me, but over a 3-day period, I found the discussions very intense. And I was very proud to hear very refreshing ideas. But more importantly, I was very proud to see some actions. We want to see, solid projects being launched, about to be launched, or celebrate the launch and success of them. So today, let's discuss about some projects that are coming to light or already have seen the light. I will start with Solomon, with the African Development Bank, to talk about how they can, really adopt and help companies and projects see the light. I will move to Semeh to talk about Africa Finance Corporation and some of their recent successes, and then on to the sovereign funds of Egypt, of Gabon and Nigeria, and then OCI, a private partner, a true private partner for success, and then we will close with Temasek to hear what they've been doing recently in Southeast Asia and how we can learn from them. So without further ado, Solomon, I'd like you to begin. I'll pass the mic to you. So I wanted to hear more from you as how you come in early in the life of projects and how we don't have very different forms of financing, especially financing early projects, and obviously maybe focus on your Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa.
I hope you can all hear me well. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your initial presentation. At the African Development Bank, what we've been doing in the past, of course, just like everybody else, is really focusing on addressing the infrastructure gap. Today we're talking about green infrastructure, but in the past it's always really been about the infrastructure gap. And in Africa, the biggest problem is the lack of bankable projects, which means we have to find ways to engage early. We would typically have just waited to, support projects on the financing end, but we realized that we need to engage early. We were doing it a bit ad hoc, as the African Development Bank, and realized that we needed to be more deliberate and structured. That's why we created Africa 50. I hope most of you know about Africa 50. So we created Africa 50 for really the purpose of stimulating the private sector infrastructure development market. Then, in terms of, we as AFDB, we worked on project preparation, which is the NEPAD Infrastructure Project Preparation Facility, where we focus more on providing governments the right transaction, technical, financial advice to structure primarily regional projects, which were mostly public, at best PPPs, but primarily public projects. But we wanted to make sure that these were done well. But now that we're talking about green infrastructure, we have to really be deliberate about it. And I like your opening comments where you said it takes a village to address a problem. So what we're doing is we today launched what we call the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. This is where we're trying to raise $500 million of project development and project preparation funding. We've created a village. The village started off with ourselves, Africa 50, and the African Union Commission, because we have to make sure that we also get that political blessing, and that's the way in which we can make it truly Pan-African. But we've gone beyond that. We've brought in, Team Europe, so we have EIB, we have EBRD, who are well known in this market. We also have Agence Française, and we also have, the Rockefeller Foundation. Project development is by itself a very risky business. So the idea is to bring in grant money, concessionary money, and then equity money through a multi-tranche facility, which essentially gives us blended financing to take a portfolio approach to the development of green infrastructure. So the idea is to do it with scale and speed. We cannot afford to really have gestation periods of 7 years. So the idea is to really focus on projects that we can actually bring to financing within 3 at most 4 years. Okay? And for us, we brought essentially everybody around the table who, in terms of the MDBs and DFIs, who are very happy to fund projects a lot faster than maybe institutional investors, right? So just imagine the projects are developed, quickly. The MDBs and DFIs are already around the table, so the financing period also gets compressed. It's no longer 18 months, it probably could be about 6 months. Then, we also want to bring in the institutional investors, the sovereign, funds, the pension funds, the insurance funds. So what we want to do is we want to cover the, projects until construction is over and cash flow is established. And then immediately after that, the idea is to crowd in the institutional investors. If we have to provide some sort of first loss or partial credit guarantee to do that, we do that. So that all of a sudden this becomes a machine to actually churn out projects. Now, in terms of the project development funds, Africa 50 will scale up to use part of it. But Africa 50 is not the only project developer in Africa. So imagine a third of it would go to Africa 50. A third of it would actually be Africa 50 working with local developers, including sovereign funds like yourselves or strategic investment funds who are effectively having to develop projects before you can actually ultimately provide debt or equity financing as well. So we believe that this would revolutionize the infrastructure project development market in Africa by supporting all credible developers, including our local developers who we should in Ecuador, as well as global, global developers who are strategically interested in Africa. And I must commend, Samir and AFC for creating AFIDA, which is the African Infrastructure Developers, Association, because we have really developed insights from that association to help us really design this to be effective. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. And that's actually a natural segue into Semeh from AFC, who can speak more about being a long-term investor in infrastructure in Africa. And I would appreciate if you could shed some light on your recent successes in investing in infrastructure, green infrastructure in Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Solomon. AFIDA was created before I joined AFC, so I don't take the credit for it. But just a quick introduction for those of you who don't know AFC. We are a multilateral. Our balance sheet is $10 billion. We started 15 years ago. Our balance sheet was $1 billion at the time. So it's proof that you can actually be successful and make a lot of money in Africa. We are owned by the private sector, by private banks, and by governments as well, by African governments. And our mandate is to invest in infrastructure projects across Africa. I want to use two examples of two sectors that we're focusing on in terms of the green infrastructure. One of them is renewables, where we have a dedicated team and dedicated funds to develop early stage projects. And as Solomon said, the biggest issue with Africa is that there are not enough early stage development projects. So we try to do two things. We try to develop the projects early on, and we try to scale up very, very quickly. Only 2 years ago, we had less than 100 megawatts of projects in wind or solar or hydro. We focused on development and on scaling up. We have partnered with an Egyptian partner, Infinity, where we acquired a significant minority of the company. Then we jointly with our partners Mazda and EBRD acquired the largest renewables platform in Africa, Lekela. So now we're at 1.4 gigawatts. We're head and shoulders larger than any other player in Africa. Only yesterday our partners have signed with the Egyptian government and with the UAE government a 10 gigawatt wind project, which speaks to starting small, developing the projects, and your success will bring other projects, will bring other funding, and you crowd in other third-party capital, whether it's sovereign money or private sector or otherwise. The way we do this is that, as I said, we have a development team and development money, but we also look for creative solutions to get the projects done as quickly as possible. We are developing a wind project in Djibouti. If we had gone through the typical project finance steps, we would have still been talking about it. It's being commissioned now. It will reach COD on the 11th of December of this year. But what we've done is that we did 100% of the equity. We funded it all equity. We saved 2 years of project finance negotiations with banks. And now that we've reached COD, banks are queuing up to fund us and to fund the project. The other sector that I would like to talk about, which is not very popular, is mining. One of the things that people are ignoring is that Africa has 40% of the battery metals in the world. What happens today is that the battery minerals are mined, they're exported to China, and China now controls 70% of the battery cells that go back to Europe to be installed in electric vehicles. So what we are doing is that we're focusing on, first of all, mining, and then developing the infrastructure and the industry to build batteries in Africa, or at least build a few steps in the value chain to develop batteries in Africa. Mining alone represents 6% of the value of a battery in a car. If you add 2 or 3 steps of the 5 steps up to the precursor, you capture 40% of the value. And the other thing is that if shipping was a country, it would have been the 6th largest polluter in the world, after China, the US, Japan, Germany, and Russia. So the fact that you are localizing the industry reduces significantly the emissions of shipping. So you tick a number of boxes by developing projects from the early stage into capturing the different parts of the value chain. Thank you.
Excellent, congratulations. I mean, this is obviously a very creative way to think about financing, cutting financing time, but also investing in industries that may look from the outside as polluting, but when you dig deeper, it's actually promoting green investments. Since the microphone is on this side, I'll move to Mr. Ayman Suleiman at the Sovereign Fund of Egypt. And I want to congratulate you on your recent signatures yesterday and some of the recent projects you've closed. I've followed with great interest their progress over the past 3 years. and found it absolutely astonishing. So with that, I'll give the floor to you to share some successes with the audience.
Exactly. As if you weren't in the room. So
Moderator's impartial.
So thank you for that question. I get the easy one. So I think when we look at crowding in investments into green, so very thoughtful remarks also from Solomon. I think the challenge in Africa and what Sana has been snatching opportunities to scale up businesses. I think we need to have more projects with scale. And what's happening right now in our part of the world, the recognition of green hydrogen as a transition, as the fuel of the future, and the scalability that is being built, and those players coming in, those that are starting small and those that are starting big, and they say the technology curve is not going to wait for anyone. If you start big, then you actually make a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then costs will eventually go down. Hindsight tells you it is happening anyway you look at it, but it's only a matter of when, it's not if. So with that conviction, we as a fund, we start investing behind those convictions. So we understand, when you read your history right, you understand, or your basics, you understand what makes sense and how those prospects of renewables we have could transform or dent the future energy market. We want to be part of that game. So as a fund, as an investment team, we look at that thesis and we invest behind it. And so without further hesitation, we committed ourselves to come into the equity of all those projects building the pipeline of hydrogen production, the entire value chain, all the way from upstream, downstream to the molecules, and also on the manufacturing of those components as well, given the scale of renewable capacities being built, be it turbines, be it pumps, be it PVs, everything across that value chain, and of course electrolyzers for green hydrogen. So with that affirmation from investors, asset managers, and government, so as an investment arm of the government, we are a manifestation of the conviction of the government that it will support that sector, it will support that industry to actually nurture the growth of that industry. And yes, we're all happy and proud. So Abdallah was there, he was part of creating that, and we managed, with the great help of our friend and partner Osama Orascom at the far end of the hall. When you have the right partner and you have the reliable partner who can actually deliver, when you draw a line in the sand, we were dreaming about commissioning this production by COP. We only got there because of choosing the right partners. Thank you for that.
So mentioning of partners, and just maybe to not follow the order I intended, maybe we switch to Mr. Osama Bishai at OCI, who again also had a very successful launch yesterday, and we want to congratulate him and hand over.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayman, for your comment. Actually, I want to take this opportunity really to touch upon two subjects. One is the success between the collaboration with the sovereign fund and an operating entity. I think what you've seen, we've launched yesterday the commissioning of the first phase of an electrolysis plant to produce hydrogen for an ammonia plant that's existing around Sofna. This is really a great example. The sovereign fund was there. They were instrumental to help us with addressing new areas of how to, with the government, related to launching a project with a technology that has not been addressed before. As Minister Hala Said mentioned, it's also, they were supporting the mitigation of risk. We were all addressing technology that was not proven. So basically this collaboration was successful, and I don't believe it can happen without a sovereign fund who has the long-term vision of a country's goal, plus the private sector and the operators who really look at the bottom line and would like things to happen. So this is a great success, and I believe that And I urge that sovereign funds should really have local partners in the areas where they invest, because that's a great element of success. The other point that I would like to just quickly mention is the bankability. The challenge we have in bankability in green energy or green technology or transformation and Africa is that a lot of these projects are not bankable. I mean, let's be clear. And a lot of these projects may not be very profitable from day one. So basically, the presence of sovereign funds is key to address alternative approaches of bankability, to be able to avail the funds for the project to be launched, to get there, and then we believe that over the years the technology will be proven, it will be cheaper, it will be profitable. But today I would say that in the next 3 to 5 years, this is the challenge today. Hydrogen is still a new technology. Transporting green ammonia or green methanol still is under a lot of research and investigation. Everybody's looking at 3-4 years from now. So in order to start today, I think bankability should be looked at maybe from a non-conventional definition. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate your comments. I will move to your left to Akim from the Sovereign Fund of Gabon. And I'd like to focus on two efforts they're leading right now, which is the sustainable bond issuance, and also if you could touch upon the carbon credit markets.
Thank you. Actually, these two initiatives are intertwined, and contrary to my co-panelists, since they will speak at length about how we can do project finance and how we can fast-track development of infrastructure using the sovereign wealth fund, here I will focus a little bit on the uniqueness of Gabon, where actually our green project is our forest. The country is 88% covered by forest. And one of the milestones that we recently passed is the certification of 90 million tons of carbon credits, UNFCCC Red Plus certified. In terms of what that could translate into dollar amount, we're talking about $2 billion plus, which once monetized will help us fast track the development of our infrastructures in the country. But let me tell you a little bit more about that. Today, the commitment of keeping 1.5 degrees alive will not happen without Gabon succeeding. And why am I remains protected? So today, we didn't really wait it, and this is a long-term commitment that the country made maybe 50 years ago to not make a choice between our development and the stewardship of the forest and the environment as a whole. And we invested in developing and making this carbon credit a reality. Now, the point or where we're trying to get at is to say that we need to build an African robust carbon market. And one of the challenges that we're facing is the discussion around integrity and quality. But since the country is a net absorber, today Gabon is the most absorbing country in terms of CO2. So there's no risk of greenwashing or leakage that you could have with some other projects, since the whole country itself is carbon positive. Now, once we will monetize, and the sovereign wealth fund has had the mandate to monetize those carbon credits, and once they're monetized, we'll follow a waterfall that was predefined and enshrined in our financial law. 25% of the proceeds will go back to the forest, meaning 15% to the people and 10% to the conservation. 25% will go into servicing the country's debt, and 25% will go into continuing investing in social infrastructures, mainly healthcare and education, and obviously 25% will go into the sovereign wealth fund to continue investing for future generations. So really the point here that we're making is investing in Gabon's carbon credit in a certain way is really investing in the protection of the planet and it will send a signal to the remaining countries of the Congo Basin, the rainforest, that the world has decided to create the right incentive for the protection of the forest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hakim. You remind me of the objective of several sovereign funds, which is to invest for future generations. But the most critical for future generations is to actually have future generations. So investing in the environment, investing responsibly, investing in green technology, green investments is critical to create value for future generations. Thank you for your comments. Let me switch to Kola from Nigeria. And Kola used to live in Egypt, and he hasn't been here since 2010, so we welcome him back. Kola, I'd like you to focus on two key topics. One is a topic I heard a lot about today, which I hadn't read about in the context of Africa before, which is deforestation. The second is your efforts in renewable. So over to you.
Thank you, Abdullah. So the NSI, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, has taken ESG as a very important topic. And for us, we started looking at reforestation a few years ago. And this was because we're actually feeling the effect of climate change quite aggressively in Nigeria. The Sahara Desert is encroaching quite a bit. And the incidence of floods in Nigeria, as you would have seen recently, have been more and more prevalent. So for us, it was a thing to address. There's a particular forest near where I live in Lagos right now, which I have seen effectively erode over the past 30 years. Right? It used to be about 100,000 hectares. It's now probably just about 10,000 hectares of forest left. So we've lost about 90% of that forest over the last 30 years. And for us, we've seen this happen in different patches across the country. And so it's very important for us to see how we can actually address that change and reverse it. And try to be more like Hakim and be a net carbon consumer. Unfortunately, it takes quite a bit of time to actually develop this project. Project development, as someone said earlier, here can take a lot longer than you like in Africa. And so what we've tried to do is actually create platforms with partners that actually allows us to accelerate these programs, allows us to also provide funding to actually expand on program, expand on the amount of projects we can do at the same time with the limited funding we have. So we've created a renewable energy platform. We are also creating a platform right now with Vitol to work on ESG particularly. My colleague working on that is here. And that platform will actually help us, one, reduce the amount of deforestation that we have, because it will provide efficient cooking stoves, better water filtration, to reduce the amount of deforestation that happens in Nigeria. That would reduce the amount of trees that we're cutting down annually. But aside from that, we've also aggressively launched a solar project across the country. Our first pilot, 10 megawatts, did get commissioned sometime in Q1. After that, we have a next phase of 60 megawatts of solar farms coming up in Nigeria. But it's a platform we've done with our partners at IFC. And it's something we're looking to replicate quite aggressively across the country. So if a few platforms like this on the reforestation side, on the renewable energy side, would actually help us reduce the amount of carbon emissions in Nigeria.
Excellent, thank you, Kola. Good luck with that. Now let me say last but not least, from Siska from Temasek. Earlier today you had a discussion about your partnership with HSBC in Southeast Asia. If you could just walk us through some highlights of this partnership and how we may learn something from that and replicate in Africa.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me, for inviting me to join that session. It's a tremendous honor and pleasure to be here with you all. First of all, maybe just before I get into the details of that particular partnership, also let me set the stage of who Temasek is. Many of you may not be as familiar. We're a Singapore-based investment company. We're wholly owned by the Singapore government. Wholly owned but not directed by them, meaning that we do have a long-term mandate, but we are not in a way directed in our strategy by the government. So we operate on commercial principles and terms. What I want to, in a way, also perhaps mention is that for us, really, climate change has become a key pillar of the overall firm's strategy. We've heard here as well, right? All of us actually are here for future generations. So we realize that we cannot really live up to that promise and to that corporate purpose if we are not focusing on climate change. So we formulated a couple of years back really our climate strategy, which has three main dimensions. The first one is looking at our current portfolio where we decarbonize the existing businesses and encourage decarbonization in those entities that we have invested in. The second pillar of the strategy is to invest in climate-aligned opportunities. So we are looking for businesses where we can really see that they have a positive impact on industry transformation, and we are seeking out those opportunities and put our capital behind it. And then the third pillar is to invest in carbon negative solutions. And so I'm very encouraged as well to hear some of the examples where we really also in the African continent see a lot of opportunity in that sense for nature-based solutions coming online and having those solutions contribute to the future of the climate challenge. What I want to do is perhaps give you a few examples generally how we invest. I think by introducing ourselves, I mentioned we're predominantly an equities investor, so we do take stakes in businesses through public and private markets. We are not focused on infrastructure, but I'm going to talk about Pentagreen anyway, because that's also an interesting example of how we actually expand our capabilities by building new platform and partnering with other organizations. But before I do so, maybe let me give you a few snapshots on our direct investments. So we do invest across early stage and growth opportunities in various sectors. Be it, to give you examples, obviously alternative mobility, we heard electric vehicles as opportunity, we heard alternative energies. Hydrogen obviously is one element, but also geothermal. There's other opportunities as well where we're really interested in looking at that and putting our capital behind where we can. The second is we are partnering with others to really deepen the focus and create scale. We have, for example, a partnership with BlackRock where we really look at what are the early stage growth businesses that have proven technologies where we can, through focused effort, really scale them up and help them access the markets faster and scale bigger. And this is one of the examples of how we've been partnering with others. The second is the partnership with HSBC, which is called Pentagreen. It's a debt financing platform where we focus in the first instance on Southeast Asia. And what we really see is, well, first of all, we at Temasek ourselves, as I mentioned, we focus on equity, so we do not have in-house capabilities on infrastructure, but we already have an infrastructure platform, which is called Clifford Capital. So we've really used as well our convening power and our partnership angle to bring the right parties together, and we also have the support from the Asian Development Bank to look at how can we collaborate of bringing the marginal bankable projects into the space where we can make them happen. And there's a few areas where we want to focus on: renewable energies, there's also mobility, battery storage, and we carved out Southeast Asia as our first focus area because that's close to home. It's a modest beginning, but we hope that the model, if we can make it work, we can actually also scale it beyond Southeast Asia. The last element I want to mention as well, because it's quite interesting about how we as a company go about it, is we have built in-house an investment platform which is fully focused on decarbonization. So we've allocated a commitment of 5 billion to really look at decarbonization as a pillar, and we created a team that's fully focused on that, just to make sure that we also have the right focus, that we have the right ability to build that capability, looking at the tech solutions, looking at the nature-based solutions, but also at the carbon ecosystem enablers, including carbon exchanges, measurement and verification systems, and so forth. And we hope through that investment we really create a virtuous circle, because that team can also connect the dots and can really work with the right stakeholders in that ecosystem to advance the mission with speed and scale. So we have those three approaches: direct investment, partnering with other established institutions, but also building and catalyzing our own platforms and then spinning it out as another. And by the way, that last example is Gen Zero.
Excellent, that's great to hear. Wanted to check if anybody has any questions from the audience. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, until you think of your smart question, let me actually ask my question. So Solomon, right now you're one of very few players that help start up projects in Africa, green projects. What's the next step? What are you hoping for?
So I'm hoping that we would really successfully implement the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. We have some soft commitments from quite a number of big players. The Rockefeller Foundation has pledged about $50 million. So we're going to get started. Now, in getting started, for me, the most critical partner are really the sovereign wealth funds / strategic investment funds. You know, the sovereign wealth funds in Africa are non-traditional in the sense that most of them have domestic obligations around social and fiscal infrastructure. In addition, they have the Stability Fund, they have the Future Growth Fund, but unlike other sovereign wealth funds, they have that domestic obligation, of which I know my good friends at NSIA in Nigeria, we're one of the pace setters in doing that. But it's important to work with you, and let me explain why. If you unpack why it takes 7 to 10 years to develop infrastructure projects in Africa, you would realize that it all has to do with what we call the enabling environment, the negotiations of power purchase agreements with governments, direct agreements with governments, etc., etc., etc. So I need somebody at the table. I mean, yes, I have good relationships with governments, I can expedite things, but I need somebody at the table who understands the international language of investments, but also understands the political realities on the ground to be that bridge. So personally, I do not go into any country to do infrastructure investments, green or not, but now I only do green, by the way, without really the equivalent of yourselves. So it was in my self-interest to work closely with Obed, of IFMA Capital, to create the African Sovereign Investment Forum. Because the idea is to bring all of you together to share. And if we're successful, I look at you as really the generator of pipeline. So in terms of next steps, it's to work with you to generate that pipeline. If there are good local developers in the country, I hope you become a bit of a filter for me as well. Because you would then be the judge as to whether this is the type of project that would truly be supported by government. So the next steps is to work with the sovereign wealth funds across the table. ASIF has, short form for the African Sovereign Investors Forum, has signed on 10 of you. The potential is to go up to about 30, 35 I hear, and I'm going to be supporting ASIF to do that in general, but also specifically to begin to expedite the next steps on developing transformational green infrastructure in Africa.
Excellent, thank you. Sema?
I'd like to add something. We've all heard here about the infrastructure gap, the need for funding, etc. One very interesting data point is that African sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and insurance companies are sitting on significant amounts of cash in Africa, and 99 point something, so less than 1% of the money goes into infrastructure projects. 99% of the money goes into US Treasury bonds and into European bonds. If you start from home, where these three types of entities, sovereign funds, pension funds, and insurance companies, allocate only 5% of their funding to infrastructure projects, it's a massive head start. But obviously, these projects are much more risky than US Treasury bonds. So there has to be a conscious decision to convert some of that money into infrastructure projects.
Absolutely agree. If you pass the microphone, please, to Ayman, I'd like to ask him, Samah just mentioned the infrastructure gap. So we all understand that the gap exists, and I think the money exists. So how can we accelerate these projects? How can we do more projects in less time? What do we need?
So the gap is actually not a financing gap. I agree. It is a plumbing gap. So the future of green energy, if we take that particular asset class, is all in Africa. So Africa, Latin America, Australia, these are the very rich renewable resource continents, but there's a delivery gap. There's no infrastructure to deliver those to power-hungry markets, to markets that are committed to green, to decarbonize. So Africa can deliver that. But the delivery is the technology, as Osama kindly mentioned. Still, shipping hydrogen is still a challenge. So you have to convert to go to ammonia, and then maybe convert ammonia back to hydrogen. This is not a very conducive methodology. So I think the technology gap is part of the solution, but also an investment in real infrastructure between African continents. So earlier this morning there was in one of the sessions there was a talk about how the Chad has so much deficit in power infrastructure, and they have less than 7% access. 7% of the population has access to electricity. This is a very sad story to hear about. While in Egypt we have 12 gigawatts of excess capacity that we could ship, but there are no connectivity lines, there's no infrastructure. So I think this is where the future of investments should go to, that actual plumbing. And once you do that, then delivery and you unlock financing that is sitting in Africa but going somewhere else. You have asset managers that use African money to invest elsewhere where technology is being developed, while homegrown technologies are not developed. Our African GDP is not developed, not even GNP is being developed. So all of those are themes that maybe when Africa awakes to start and realize the value of the resources we have, I think then the next wave will be, we are the green contributors to the future, then that gap needs to be filled. We walk a mile and the rest of the world walks a mile towards us as well. So I think this is where we should start.
Super. Maybe I'll turn to final comments from Kola and Akeem. What is the one project you want to celebrate in 2023?
For us, it would be the expansion of the 60 megawatt renewable energy platform.
Super.
For us, obviously, will be the monetization at a fair price of our carbon credit, for the signal that it will send to the rest of the rainforest countries.
Excellent. Last but not least, Osama Bashir, which project or which industry would you rather spend more time in 2023?
Actually, we are very much already focused on renewables, particularly wind farms. Yesterday we have signed an initial agreement with the Egyptian government to develop 3 gigawatts. I believe that renewables, particularly for Egypt, is number one, is a no-brainer. Whether, at the risk of being politically incorrect, whether we are decarbonizing or not, gas resources are limited. We need to continue to generate power for the country for industries, for obviously hydrogen and green products. And I think the only unlimited resource we have are renewables. And so basically we are very much focused next year to develop this 3 gigawatt. And actually we started last week the construction for another 500 megawatts with the same group of investors, and we hope that in probably 2 years will be in operation.
Thank you. I recognize that everyone sitting to my right here on the stage is a leader. Their organizations are leaders in Africa, and if we have any hope in saving the continent for future generations, it will be their efforts that will start it. So good luck, everyone, and thank you for joining us and your very thoughtful and kind words today. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed